Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about all of the books I read in July. Last month was a pretty productive reading month for me. I, for the most part, stuck to my TBR, read a lot of the books on them, decided that some of the books that were on my TBR were books that I had completely lost interest in. I accepted a few things about my reading taste right now. One of those things is that young adult books just don't work for me anymore. I'm a grown adult lady. I'm not a young adult anymore, and I have a hard time connecting to those characters and those stories, and just that style of writing doesn't really do a whole lot for me anymore. And that's okay, because I'm not the audience for those books, and so I took a few things off of my TBR that were young adult that I was kind of interested in, but kind of had a feeling I wasn't going to connect with, so just gave up on them. And the other thing is that contemporary and historical fiction generally don't work for me. There are exceptions to both of these things, of course, but for the most part, I really have to be in the mood for a contemporary or historical to care about the story at all. It's just not a genre that I want to read all the time, and when I do, there are particular types of contemporary and historical fiction and certain themes that appeal to me much more than others. These are things I've known for a while don't really work for me, but I've kind of just tried to ignore my preference and read some of those stories anyway. I keep putting them on my TBR because I hear good things about these stories, but they end up just not working for me. It's just not my style of story, not my preferred genres, and accepting it has been kind of nice, kind of relieving to take a few things off of my TBR that I know I'm not going to read. I tend to have a hard time doing that when I say I'm going to do something. I usually do it, and when I don't, I feel bad about it, and I've kind of done that with my TBRs, which is why I'm trying to read through all the things from my past TBRs because I feel bad about not having actually read them. But now I feel like I can say I just don't want to read them anymore. I don't want to read a book that I'm not going to be engaged with and enjoy as much as someone who actually likes those genres just because I said I was going to read them. So I'm just saying I don't want to read them. I'm never going to read them. I might read them someday. I'm probably never going to read them. All that being said, I did for the most part stick to my TBR. So today, instead of talking about the books in the order that I read them, I'm going to talk about them from the ones I enjoyed the least to the one I enjoyed the most and sort of rank them. So first off, books that were on my TBR that I decided I just don't have any real interest in reading anymore are Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard, Gilded by Marissa Meyer. Both of these are young adult fantasy books, and I have read from these authors before and enjoyed them, which is why I was interested in picking these books up, but I think I would rather spend more time reading an adult book with maybe a similar type of story. And the other two were I'll Be Home for Hanukkah by K.K. Hendon and Last One Home by Debbie Macomber. I've read a couple Debbie Macombers before, and I really enjoyed them for what they were. They're kind of lighter, fluffier things, especially compared to what I'm typically reading. But I'm just not in the mood for it. I feel like she's a good author to go to. Her stories are very readable and entertaining, if a little bit ridiculous. But I'm just not in the mood for that type of story right now. And I'll Be Home for Hanukkah, I'm really not in the mood for a holiday romance at all. I don't know if I'll ever be in the mood for that, but I just decided I'm not really in the mood for any type of contemporary right now, so I'm not going to read these. Then I had two books that I DNF'd, the first one being The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Jones. I got almost halfway through this, and I just felt like the plot wasn't progressing at all. Nothing had really happened. They were still assembling their crew. I think the setup of this, the premise was very interesting, a sort of fantasy heist-style stories, very appealing to me, but like you don't have your crew halfway through. There were I think 2 people. I don't even know. I didn't really care about the main characters. I didn't connect with them at all. And the fact that nothing was really going on halfway through the story, it felt like the main plot was just still kind of developing. And I was hoping they'd be at least have all the characters together by that point. So I just gave up on it. I wasn't really interested in waiting around characters that I wasn't invested in. And the other one was The Ninth Hour by Alice McDermott. This is a historical fiction, and it sounded interesting, but it's much more about like smaller things. The story was more focused on like day-to-day small details than the bigger picture of what was happening, especially the way the story starts off is a pretty big event, but it felt like it was kind of downplayed. And then we skip through time a little bit and we're just looking at more ordinary day-to-day things, and it just wasn't very interesting for me or very exciting. So I decided I didn't want to read it anymore, so I stopped. Then from the ones I enjoyed the least to the one I enjoyed the most, I think the one I enjoyed the least was probably The House by Raylan Drake. The story was fine, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's kind of my fault that I went into it with the expectations I had. I didn't realize that this was a middle grade, or I guess it's technically young adult. The characters in it are teenagers in high school, but they felt a lot younger. It's a very short story. It's about a potentially haunted house, and the main character and her friends go to investigate it kind of on a dare because there's a bowl of candy out every Halloween. So they wanted to see if it was actually haunted. There's a little bit of a mystery. I think everything was solved pretty simply and easily, which it is a shorter story, but still it didn't feel like the mystery had a whole lot of mystery, just no one bothered to ask about the house. So the story was fine. I think it'd be good for younger readers who are kind of interested in spookier stories but not ready for actual spooky stories. But for me, it was just fine. It was kind of a fluffy piece for me. I also read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. I've heard really good things about this as a thriller, and I didn't really care about it at all. It felt kind of like an action movie where there was just constant action, but the main characters, the good guys, weren't really good people at all. These two men are trying to figure out who's responsible for the death of both of their sons, and they just go on this violent spree through the city trying to track down whoever was responsible. It's a little bit crazy. It was non-stop action, and I didn't like the main characters, so that made it very difficult for me to care about what was going on. So I just thought this was fine, but also not a genre I'm typically going for, so it might just not be to my taste. And I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is an older horror fiction about a house that is probably haunted, and the man who is supposed to inherit the house goes with a couple of people that he has selected to investigate the house if it's actually haunted. If so, what is the haunting? It's much more psychological horror than I thought it would be, and it also didn't feel very horror to me. Like, something about the tone of it didn't quite land for me, where it just sort of felt like the main character might just be crazy and making everything up, which I think is kind of the point. If you read the book, it makes sense that everyone else also thinks that it's this one character doing all of this stuff, and you're not really sure what the house is doing or why. I don't know, it was kind of interesting. It just didn't really click for me. I think it had all of the pieces of the story that I was looking for, but they didn't come together in a way that worked for me. Then I have Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. I was expecting something pretty gruesome going into this from the other reviews that I've seen of this book, and it wasn't as graphic as I had anticipated, which was a relief for me because I don't like overly graphic things. The horror within this is body horror though, and that is something that I am not very fond of. I enjoyed the story overall. I didn't really enjoy those specific horror elements. As you get further into the story, there's more of them. But this was an interesting dark fairy tale type of setup. I liked it. I didn't love it. It was a good dark fantasy, I guess. I don't like body horror. I don't know. Then I read Witch King by Martha Wells, which is a new release. And I liked this story. It is a lot upfront of, you don't really know who everybody is or what's going on in the world or how anything works. You kind of piece it together as you go. I felt like it was a lot up front of being like, I have no idea what's going on, and then it goes between past and present, which first off added even more things that I felt like I don't know what's going on or who any of these people are. But it makes sense because the main character, when you first meet him, doesn't know where he is or when he is and what's going on, and you kind of figure everything out with him. And the past and present eventually come to parallel each other much more closely, and I really liked seeing all of that come together. So not quite as captivating as I had hoped it would be, but I did really enjoy it overall. I liked seeing everything come together and figuring out what was going on. Then I read Among Thieves by M.J. Kuhn. I enjoyed this. I was kind of unsure about it. It sounded like something I was really going to like, so I was a little hesitant to get my hopes up too much. But I liked that we followed multiple point of view characters. I was kind of expecting there to just be following the one character and then having everyone around her. But this is a sort of heist story with a bunch of criminals. They're in a gang together, basically, and they all have very different motivations and sometimes conflicting motivations about why they're going on this job together, why they're doing what they're doing. And it is a fantasy setting, so I thought it was very interesting. There's a lot of action. You kind of start out, things are always happening. There's not a lot of sitting around just building character, although we do get to know each of the characters and why they're doing what they're doing. So I enjoyed this, and I'm probably going to read the sequel hopefully soon, but we'll see. I also read The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third and final book in the First Law trilogy. I've heard so many incredible things about this series. I can't say I loved it as much as everyone who talks about it seems to, but I did really enjoy it. Joe Abercrombie's writing is very readable. It's very easy to just keep moving through the story and not want to put it down. His character development is incredible. I think he builds very fleshed out characters and the way they interact with each other, and then the plot just kind of builds and builds throughout the series. So I did really enjoy it. I had a great time reading this. I don't think it's going to be a new favorite of mine, but I do think it's really good, and I'm really glad I finally read it. Then for my top 3 books of the month, I feel a little bad about this because my 2 favorites are books that are not out yet. So my favorite book, my third favorite book, and my favorite book that is already out was Mage in the Endless Unknown by S.J. Miller. This is a graphic novel. It's, for the most part, wordless, and you meet this mage who wakes up in a meadow. It seems very cute and charming. The mage seems pretty optimistic, and then they enter this world that is pretty horrifying. There are a lot of terrible things happening and happening to the mage, and you go through this journey with them as they try and navigate this very dangerous, terrifying place. I really loved the art style of this. I think it was very easy to follow, even without any type of narration or dialogue to figure out what was going on, to feel scared for the mage of not knowing what's going to happen, but knowing something bad's probably going to happen, and feeling hopeful that the mage will make it through it, hopefully unscathed. But I think this was a really cool reading experience. I really enjoyed it. I definitely recommend it. Very quick read, obviously, but I really liked the art style, and I think the story overall was really cool. Then my second favorite read, which comes out this month, is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling where we kind of flip the roles of good and evil. We have our main character, Toadling, who is a human who was taken as a baby and raised by the Fae in Fairyland, and she is given the task as an adult to go and give a gift to a newborn child. And then we get into the curse and figuring out why she cursed this tower, why it is surrounded by thorns. A knight shows up hoping to break the curse, but she has sworn to uphold the curse no matter what. So you kind of see her interacting with the knight and go along with her as she explains why she's done what she's done, figure out her backstory, and see what's going to happen. I really enjoyed this. It is a surprisingly sweet story for some of the things that are happening in it. It definitely felt very cozy, even though there's a lot of weird, creepy face stuff going on, Toadling as a main character is incredibly sweet and naive, and I really liked it. And then my favorite book that I read doesn't come out until September, so I feel really bad saying it's my favorite because it's not available for most people right now. But it is the third book in a series, so I would definitely recommend checking out the first and second books, which are already out. And this is Lights by Brenna Thumler. This is the third and final book in the Sheets graphic novel trilogy, the first books being Sheets and Delicates. I have loved all three of these. I really like the art. I love the main characters. It's so sweet. It's a middle grade graphic novel. The first book is about a girl named Marjorie who has recently lost her mother. Her father and her much younger brother are dealing with it in their own ways, and she's kind of picking up the slack even though she's like 13. She's basically running her family's laundromat to keep them going and just dealing with everything very responsibly. And then she meets a ghost who is the ghost of a recently deceased young boy who finds her laundromat and is unintentionally causing a lot of trouble for her. They become friends. In Delicates, we add another character called Eliza, who is sort of an outcast, very misunderstood. She has very niche interests, and she ends up joining Marjorie and Wendell the ghost. And then in the third book, Lights, we finally get to learn more about Wendell's life when he was alive and figure out what actually happened to him more specifically. It's very charming, very heartbreaking, but also heartwarming stories about these main characters dealing with grief and bullying and just friendship in general. And I am very excited for it to come out. It comes out the first week of September, so unfortunately you can't read it just yet, but I would definitely recommend checking out the first two books in anticipation of that third and final book coming out. So that is everything I read in July. 2 DNFs, 10 books that I finished. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, what your favorite read from July was. I'd love to hear that. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.